Jennifer Hitchcock, and I teach basic government and politics at Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology that is in Alexandria, Virginia, not too far away from the nation's capital. Super excited to talk to you about the SCOTUS comparison FRQ, and we're going to be looking at campaign finance and Citizens United, free speech. Oh my goodness, this is from last year's exam. It's going to make you stop and think a little bit, which is a good thing because the SCOTUS FRQ is a challenge that is overcomable. So go ahead and grab some paper and a pen, and we're going to review just a little bit about that SCOTUS comparison FRQ. So this is question 3 that you will run across, and you have 20 minutes to complete this question. It is a weird one because there are 3 points, A, B, and C, but actually there's 3 skills that you will be accomplishing across 4 tasks. It's a weird thing about points, right? There's 3 tasks and 4 points total. Our first point is, are we able to identify a common constitutional concept? We want to identify, maybe sometimes describe them as prompted. It can be a clause in the Constitution, it can be a right, it can also be a judicial doctrine, which is something that is established in court precedent, and is used as a rule to help guide courts in the future. Our B point, there's 2 separate tasks that you have to accomplish, each with their own point designation. The B1 point is going to be a description about the required case. You're going to say something true about that required case, facts, decision, reasoning as prompted in the stimulus. And then our B2 point has to do with comparison between that required case that you have to know off the top of your head and some aspect of fact, decision, reasoning in the majority opinion in the case presented. So that's our given case. 2 points there. And then our C point, once we're able to get past our D point, is a little bit easier. It's to explain how or explain why the case is going to connect to some other concept. Remember, we've got our task verbs here, so describe, once again, we want to describe the characteristics, show that we understand where things are by presenting facts, reasoning, decision with detail. Then we get into compare, which is looking at reasoning, decision, majority opinion of required case with that given case, and then explain how or explain why the court does something in conjunction with external course content. The other component to this that I like to stop and make sure that we understand is that each one of these terms, majority decision, fact of the case, holding, and reasoning, all mean something completely different. Our majority decision is usually a loose reference to the case itself, either who won or kind of just the case in general, right? But it also is a very technical thing. It's the prevailing court interpretation of that right or that law, whatever it might be, to the scenario at hand. Our facts of the case are always going to be, and we can find facts of the case, holding, and reasoning in the actual decision that's been handed down. I advise my students to use websites like Justia or to go to the Supreme Court's their website that has all of their decisions that are cataloged, and look at the syllabus. The syllabus are written by people who work for the court, but not necessarily the justices themselves, and they are going to outline the facts of the case, the constitutional issue at hand, the holding, and the reasoning in a much more straightforward way that is a little bit more detailed than what you're going to find otherwise, and those are the things that we need to be successful on this test. So facts of the case, what did the government do in the scenario that led to the case, Congress passing the law, so on and so forth. Remember, active voice, so use your active voice. And then what specific events brought that case, either criminal or civil, before the court. Our holding is the outcome. It tells us exactly what the court's interpretation is. Something like, this is unconstitutional on the basis of our First Amendment interpretation or whatever it might be. It answers this question, given this set of facts and this law, this is the outcome. And our reasoning is going to provide, it's what most of the work is that you will see in a decision, a majority decision that's been handed down, and it's a discussion about how the justices arrive at their holding. And that's important. That's where we get precedent. That's where we get tests. That's where we get directives to lower courts on how to apply these decisions and how to change their interpretations of whatever statute might be or a constitutional clause moving forward. All right, so you are going to want to go ahead and read this prompt because I'm going to present the questions to you from the stimulus, and you'll need to use this because you have to pull information from this and write about it. So take a minute, and we'll move on to that A point. A points on the SCOTUS comparison FRQ are always the ones that we rejoice because it's identified, and that is simply to name. So here we want to identify the civil liberty that is common to both citizens and Eichmann. Pause your video and go ahead and try to answer this question. Here is an exemplar of how you would earn this point, and it is short and sweet. The civil liberty, right? So we are referencing a concept that is common to both Citizens United and Eichmann is the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. It would not be enough to say First Amendment. Remember, there's 6 rights that are embedded in the First Amendment, so I don't know which one you mean. Do you mean free exercise? Do you mean association? Do you mean free speech? They're different, and they have completely different interpretations, so you have to be specific, right? And so that's kind of how I tell my kids, is both to reference, especially on these liberties, to reference the place that you find it, the geographic location, if you'll see an amendment as that way, so First Amendment, and then they have to drill down into that First Amendment to find where, right? Freedom of speech. And that is where they earn the point. So our B point, a little bit tougher. Go ahead and pause your video and see how you do in writing an answer to this. Again, we are looking at reasoning in Citizens, and US v. Eichmann led to a similar holding in both cases. All right, so we're back. A lot of moving parts on this point. Here's an exemplar of a successful response, and I'm going to break down for you where they're doing the thinking that I need to see in order to award them a point. Our first component here is we need to say something true about the required case, which is Citizens United, right? And so they are going to have to get at the reasoning in Citizens United. And actually, I'm missing a little highlight here, but it says the court reasoned that this was allowed because money is a form of speech, and therefore it cannot be restricted. So I had to say something about citizens' reasoning, right? That's the why they arrived at the holding that they did. What I like about this response is they also, so that's one action. They gave me one more action that I advise my kids to do, which is to provide the reasoning from the stimulus on the given case. And that's highlighted. So US v. Eichmann, the court reasoned that the burning of a flag was a form of symbolic speech and protest, right? 2 pieces of reasoning, not necessarily needed, but it helps ensure that that point is earned. Now we have to compare the holdings. So that's 2 more things that I have to do in order to be successful on this FRQ. And I have to set up what the holding is. Soft money is allowed, and that this created the ability for super PACs to donate unlimited amount. I mean, like, really the only thing that you need to know here is that it's allowed, that this is permissible speech, right? Soft money is allowed, permissible. That's the critical component to this, in which the point will be earned. They also have to compare that in a similar way to Eichmann's holding. And they do that in a little bit of a weird way, but it's still successful. I might like them to say in US v. Eichmann, the holding was X, and the court reasoned Y. Here, what they're doing is they kind of skip that, and they say both cases had holdings that proved how much money or burning the flag was constitutional part of one's First Amendment rights. So they're comparing the holdings. And it's maybe a riskier thing to do. They're successful in this point. If I were to give them any feedback on how to ensure that they got that point, I would say make sure that you give the holding in US v. Eichmann as a specific statement that stands on its own before you get into that comparison, just to make sure that no one misses that you understand what you're talking about. An example of a non-point acquisition here, right? The student here is going to present incorrect facts about the case, and they're not providing reasoning. So Citizens United focusing on the usage of political videos and ads during the election of 2008. I mean, I could go on and reading this, but this is all about the facts. It turns into something kind of about ruling or our holding when it said both cases establish a ruling in which the Supreme Court rules in favor of either group. I mean, okay, so we're using our words interchangeably. Remember, our holding is given this set of facts and this outcome, this is the result. And the holding here, you have to compare both to get that second point. The reasoning is what you have to provide for our first point. You have to state, like, this is what the court reasoned. But instead of talking about the reasoning of Citizens for our B1 point, the student discussed and outlined the facts of the case. This is something that take your time and make sure that you're looking for which part of the decision you are asked to answer. It's a very easy thing to confuse, and it always breaks my heart because kids can say things that are factually accurate. In this case, they did about the facts of Citizens United, but the answer, the question, doesn't ask anything about the facts of the case. There also isn't an explicit conversation about the holding in Eichmann, and so that's why that second point can be awarded for our B2 point. So this one gets neither point. Ready to bring your brand into the real world? Shopify is ready for that too. With a retail point of sale solution that lets you sell in stores, or markets, or pop-up events, wherever your customers find you. Your idea? All right. In our C point, explain how those unhappy with precedent established in Eichmann can use a constitutional process to have it overturned. Pause the video. We'll come back and see an example. Okay. So, constitutional process. Explain how, the constitutional process. So now I gotta think, what can I turn to the Constitution to be able to find a way to fix this problem? And of course, I hope you're all thinking a constitutional amendment, right? So we have to explain that constitutional amendment while also making sure that we connect to the stimulus. So those unhappy with precedent in Eichmann can pass an amendment to make that ruling unconstitutional. If I stop there, all I have done is identify. I have to describe the process. So Congress proposes, 2/3 vote each house, 3/4 of the states ratify, full stop. That's our description. I am showing course content. But now I have to show how that is going to help those who are unhappy for that final point. This last sentence does that for us. If the amendment prohibits flag burning, the Supreme Court will have no choice but to create new precedent. Wrong word, right? So, oh my gosh, did they get it wrong? We can kind of follow along and see that they understand what they're referencing. It's not president, it's precedent. Right? By saying overturning a previous ruling the Supreme Court has to follow, they've given a description of what precedent is and how it works. That helps us understand that precedent is just a minor factual error. Nonetheless, this does all of the things. It identifies that process, it describes it, and then it shows how that is going to help people overturn the court's ruling. And that, my friend, is the answer in a nutshell, right? We've done all the things. So we will be looking at further FRQs coming up. I wish you the best of luck.